Thank you guys for tuning in to the Life's Better podcast, where we say life is so much better with God, community, and purpose. Josh and I are really excited about our guest. This is Ron Rowe. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Ron is here because he's going to be talking with us about money. Ron, for a number of years, has actually walked with people, individuals, families through their own personal finances, specifically with Financial Peace University, kind of leading that and working with his wife to train people with personal finances. And speaking of your lovely wife, she is actually a personal certified financial planner. And so this is just kind of something that you guys think about, talk about, train people in. And so we're really excited to have you on the show.
Well, thank you. Yes, my wife is probably better qualified for this, but the financial industry is heavily regulated, and sometimes she has to be careful about what she says, and I don't have to be quite as careful.
Yeah. So if Ron swears on the show, it's just because he's not being careful. No, I'm teasing. Ron, I'm sure will not do that. But we did want to talk a little bit before we get into this. Why would we include this on our show? The focus of our show is growing your relationship with God, building, a healthy community, and making sure that you are focused in a purpose and a pursuit that God has called you to. So why in the world are we talking about money? A few things that I want to just address. God talks a ton about money. If you open up Scripture, any guesses as to how many times God actually talks about either possession or money?
20 times?
So it's actually
800.
Yeah, it's over 800. I had already told him on that.
Yeah.
So he stole my
cheated,
answer. Yeah. He did. So over 800 times, Jesus himself probably talks about it more than anyone else in the Bible. This is important to him. This is important for our relationship with God. And so if it's important enough to talk about it in the Bible, we're going to talk about it on the show. And then when it comes to community, I think it'd be hard-pressed for any of us to find a community in the world that money is not relevant on some level. People are stressing about it. People are, fantasizing about it. People are talking about it, and it's something that we need to discuss. Particularly, I think, at the beginning of the year, as we're thinking about goal setting and we're thinking about what it is that we should and maybe we shouldn't do this year financially. I think this is a good place to start.
Absolutely.
And then finally, when it comes to purpose, I know personally, I think you guys have experienced this as well. If you have a good understanding of money, it can actually be a wonderful tool to fuel purpose. If you've got some misalignment, it can actually be your master, and it can lead to disaster. Absolutely. And so that's where we're headed today. Yeah. But before we get into all that, we want you guys to be able to get to know Ron a bit. And so we're going to play a game called Hot Seat. Now, this is Hot Seat Money Edition, and so we're just going to pepper you with a few questions, Ron, about money, and hopefully it won't be too embarrassing. But the first question I've got for you is, what is the worst financial decision that you have ever made?
So he previewed 2 questions for me on this, so I'm going to cheat, and I asked him permission to explain it. So I read the 2 questions, and I started laughing in my living room really loudly. My wife came in and said, well, what's the question, what's up? And I said, read these 2 questions and tell me what the answer is. And I'll give you the second question, what's the best financial decision you ever made? Well, she looked at him, we both had the same answer. So I have to tell you a little about my history. Both my wife and I are divorced once, so we're on our second marriage. And we've been married now for 14 years this Friday. So we have a wonderful, wonderful relationship. I'm a very lucky man. But anyway, our divorce wasn't, so the worst financial decision was our first marriage. It wasn't why we got divorced, but it does create a lot of stress. And the people we were with were not aligned at all. And my wife and I are very well aligned when it comes to finances. So that would be the best financial decision we ever made, where the best investment is in my current life. So.
Yeah, even when you just think about, I love that word alignment, because when you think about a car being in alignment, it means it's working together. And it's out of alignment, you've got different machinery that's actually working against themselves. And so, yeah, to describe a marriage that's in alignment when it comes to finances, talk about gaining the proper momentum to achieve some of the goals that you have in life. That's huge. So best financial decision, marrying Jen. Worst financial decision. Well, maybe we'll talk about that in more detail. But yeah, we get it. We get it. We understand it.
Yeah.
Josh, what question do you have?
So oh wow, I'm on one of my further questions. Oh yeah, what is the first thing ever you remember saving money to buy?
Oh boy, I was really young. My parents gave me so much. I usually got it when I got for Christmas.
Yeah.
But believe it or not, probably would have been a game.
A game?
Yeah, even one that I didn't get for Christmas, like video game. But yeah, I did save. I mean, early on, I had an actual savings account.
Yeah.
Money in there.
How young were you when you had your first savings account?
Oh, I was really young. I might have been 8 years old. I started early that day, and I remember getting my little pass. I used to pay like 6-7% interest on a savings account back then.
Yeah, I'm still getting that actually. Yeah. I think I'm about 10%. Is what Bank of America I think is giving me these days. No, that's neat. Okay, so
really
some
cool.
sort of game, and it sounded like maybe it was a video game. Is that what I'm hearing?
They didn't have video games back in my day.
Okay.
It was I remember a physical game that I wanted, like a board game.
The original Monopoly.
No,
Now
I'm
you're speaking my
sure I got the Monopoly from that. I don't remember the game exactly, but it was a game, I'm sure.
Sure.
Yeah.
All right, so this will not air for another week, so I'm safe to ask this question. What are you getting for your wife in your 14th anniversary this Friday?
Well, other than a card,
Big spender here.
technically speaking, nothing. No, my wife agreed that if I bought her a vacation, that would actually cover. We got Christmas and then the anniversary in January and Valentine's in February or birthdays in March. So I got her more than that, but pretty good vacation coming up at the end of February.
Very cool.
I'm off the hook for Friday, I think.
Well, you better still get that card.
I got the card, but
That's good.
Okay, so this one is a little more personal than my first one. What is the biggest tip you've ever given, and why did you give it to the person?
Yeah, so I'm going to say it's a combination of myself and my wife, and it's really my wife's idea, but I'll share credit for it. Pretty much every Christmas we try to give a good tip at a restaurant. And when you think of tips, though, don't think in dollar amounts. Think of the percentage versus the bill, because I probably paid more than this when I bought dinner for an entire family or something. We had to give more than $100. But every Christmas we try to give a big tip, like when we go to Huddle House. So it might be a $20 breakfast and then give a $100 tip.
Oh, neat.
Wow. Yeah.
But we try to do that once a year. Now this year we didn't do it because now it's so easy in restaurants. But previously that's what our habit has been right around Christmas time.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's really cool.
I think that's great. So, Ron, again, you've been in really the business of helping people, at least when it comes to giving of your time. It's not something that you get paid for, but you've been serving people in our community for a number of years now when it comes to personal finances. Love to hear from you. What got you into that in the first place? Why it brings you joy? Why do you keep doing that? What is it that's in your heart for personal finance and individuals going through that?
Well, not just because it's my wife's job, although that's a big piece of it, is I've always been into, I have an MBA and I had some management experience, so I had some financial work. But I think because we had, going through divorce, we both had gone through Dave Ramsey's Financial Peace. There was obviously a divorce care thing in there. And I think that when we moved to this community, we said, well, where's the best place for us? And there wasn't really anybody who did Financial Peace University on a community basis. I think one church has their own coordinator, but it's only for that church. So that's where we said, well, this would be a good place for us to try to serve the whole community. And sometimes it's difficult getting enough people in this class, but we've had a couple of really good classes. So.
Yeah, I know even just you mentioning just divorce, I was reading an article not that long ago that said that's one of the leading indicators of divorce, if there is arguments and there's conflict having to do with the issue of money. And so I just want to ask you, if you could step in and really solve one problem or misalignment that people seem to have with money, what would you love to solve? What would that one piece be? And maybe it's not one, maybe it's multiple, but what would you love to solve when it comes to that misalignment?
Between a married couple.
Yeah,
between a couple, right.
Even individuals, if you're seeing some individuals and knowing, hey, yeah, this could be a problem for their personal life, and if they end up getting married, it's going to be even, exasperated. What would you want to solve?
Well, I'm not sure this answers it exactly, so I'll take two shots at it. But
Sure.
The first thing you got to do is you got to have a budget.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're in a relationship, have a married, you've got to be aligned on the budget. Have to be. That's something Dave Ramsey says. If you don't have the other person in on it, it's just not going to work. So you got to have that. Now, as individuals, that's the first step to everything. You got to have a budget, or you just can't make things work. But if you want me to expound on some individual item in terms of expenses,
Yeah, let me ask you, when it comes to people who are hearing that word budget and all they think is, oh, well, I'm going to have to deal with an allowance, and I'm not a child anymore, and what would you say, hey, this is a simple way to look at it, and also at the same time be motivating enough for them to embrace it?
Yeah, there's a number of ways to get motivated about it, but money can cause you a lot of stress if you don't have enough money. And I guess I would say an action that one ought to do in a first part of a budget, and this was what Dave Ramsey, his first step in baby steps, is to create an emergency fund. So I guess I'll go in that direction, that you want to have enough money. He typically recommends $1,000 for people who are, you're really starting out and struggling, $500. But that's so important, because when something breaks, something unexpected happens, you will be stressed out if you don't have a little bit of money on the side. That will, and I've seen examples, many, many examples through Dave Ramsey and even in our personal lives, that, your air conditioner breaks, or, that's a big ticket item. $500 isn't going to cover that. That would be the major thing I would do. And that's the first step that Dave Ramsey suggests, is an emergency fund. Not just so if you're budgeting, and it's your first budget and you don't have an emergency fund, you got to have that line item in there. And I consider that as an essential.
Yeah.
Not an option.
Yeah.
So.
No, I've got an emergency fund. Josh, do you have one as well?
Yeah. But honestly, a lot of that came because of my wife being a lot better with money than I am. But yeah, we do.
Is it up to about 500,000 now?
Yeah, I wish. Oh my goodness.
I did say 500, not 500,000.
No, that's good.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So first question from me goes right along the lines of why this is important for the church. In reading in the Bible, we learned that Jesus not only says that we are, renting our bodies, but we're also renters of talents, of renting of money in general, using the parable of the talents as sort of an example of that, of how we've been given and we're expected to use that for something. So my question is, what encouragement would you give to a Jesus follower on how to manage money well, or what coaching would you give a person in terms of what they're supposed to do?
Yeah, so one of the things in the Bible, I know the parable verses, really about the love of money. It's not, when we're trying to teach people how to handle money, remember, it's not just a focus on money, because money is just something that you exchange for something. It could be time or something similar to that. It's really the love of money that's the root of all evil. And I believe, and Dave Ramsey doesn't teach this, that I think the Bible wasn't just talking about money, because money can be exchanged for item. You love your car too much. You love a possession too much, because you can exchange money for anything. You love your time too much. That he wants people to put God first, and he just uses money because money can represent everything, anything that you can exchange money for. And I think in terms of the church, how that would help you is if you put God first, then your love of money or the love of possessions or love of anything else isn't going to get in the way.
Yeah.
So.
Let's get real practical, if you're okay with it. I would like to talk about some best practices. So let's talk about best practices when it comes to a budget. You've already said, okay, first line on it seems like we've got to set aside enough money to start building up some sort of reserve, that emergency fund. What would be some of the next steps in that, best practices for budget? What else would you include in that?
Well, Dave Ramsey always has as his first line donations to the church.
Okay.
So
Well,
I'm
hey,
sure you would appreciate
you know
that.
what? I did not pay you to say that, but we're
You
not
did
going to
not.
argue with it, I guess.
But I think even the church would agree, if you're in a really tough spot and you can't even handle your essentials, then what good does it do to give it to the church if you're going to have to get some other support. So, but if you're doing a budget and you're being true to what you should be, that would be the first item on there. But when you start looking through the various things, obviously you got to ask yourself the question, is this item essential? Well, obviously food, clothing, housing is, but then you get down into some other things like some of the people we've run into, they will have a cable bill. Well, I got to have TV, but then they got all the bells and whistles, and their cable bill's $200. I said, man, if you can't, handle all these other essentials, cable TV is not essential. I mean, that's one that we run into that, think about, is this really essential? And another one I would put on there, when you talk about food, yes, food is essential, but I hear this story all the time through Dave Ramsey and through our own work. Eating out. People are literally eating their retirement. That's the saying that we hear all the time. And when people make their first budget, not just food, it will be eating out. And we run into this in our classes. They look at that and said, holy cow, I never realized I've spent that much money on food. When we get another class, though, I would love to talk to people about how did this COVID thing change it, because so many of the restaurants and everything were shut down. And I bet you that expenditure got a lot less for people last year. But traditionally, though, that's the one item when they create a budget, they say, holy cow, I didn't know I spent that much money eating out. And eating out is not an essential. I mean, generally you can make it at home. Yeah. And that typically has really been a tipping point for some people in terms of their budget.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's good. So I think you hit on something that I have tried to communicate to my children so many times, just asking them, okay, what's the difference between need and want? And it sounds to me that when you're making a budget, you prioritize the need, not the want. Because I would even argue you don't need television. I mean, you were nice enough to say, hey, you don't need all the bells and whistles, but I think reality is we don't need it, even though we think, oh, well, I'm so bored, I have to have it. No, not if you're not able to actually pay your rent,
I'm not sure you need TV anymore anyway. I got rid of, we have internet, so we have to pay that, but even though we can easily afford it, we got rid of regular TV because Netflix or whatever you can watch online. Yeah. Cable TV is not essential whether you can afford it. Yeah. Not that most of the time it's a waste to me. I don't enjoy it anymore. So.
Josh is going to ask you a best practice when it comes to savings.
Yeah. So, there's always like cool practical ways that I hear about. Or unique ways that people save money. One that Emily and I use that I didn't use until I met her was we have in our banking account does this cool thing where every time we make a purchase with our credit card, it rounds it up to the nearest dollar and then takes that and saves it into a little separate account that we just don't even really pay attention to for a few months. And then it ends up being, it's not a huge amount, but it's nice to be like, oh, wow, we saved this back. Is there any unique things that you and Jen do in order to save a little bit extra or maybe you did early that you have since not really needed to do anymore, that you guys can say, hey, this is at least something you can do?
Yeah, that's, I'm not familiar with that one, so that's a new one, so obviously we never went through that. for us anymore, it probably isn't as applicable. But I think after you get your emergency fund, even before you start saving long term, you got to get rid of debt. So don't forget that's the not mortgage debt, but credit card debt certainly. Then you can start doing those little things for savings. And so this isn't a secret, but the way you want to do it is, workplace savings plans. But especially if your employer has a match, you can't beat that because, most of the places have like a 30% match. That's a 30% rate of return on your investment as soon as you put it in there. So that's the number one way people want to save. And then typically a Roth or something like that because it's tax-free if you're looking longer run. But that's all part of the budgeting. So not any real secrets there. Don't ever overlook. But Dave Ramsey would tell you got to get rid of the debt even before you do that. And that's a little bit debatable when you get a 30% match, but he's hard on getting rid of debt. So.
For a person, and maybe some of our viewers this way as well, for a person who has no idea what this 30% thing is, what exactly is that?
Yeah. Well, a lot of workplace savings plans, 401ks. If you have 401k savings plans, and there'll be different things. There's something called if my wife was here, she would know all of them, but a SEP IRA. A lot of teachers can put money in addition to the pension that they have for the teachers, something called a SEP IRA. I can't remember if the school matches, but most 401k plans from employers, in order to encourage saving, particularly pensions, real pensions are rare anymore. I got a small pension from somebody I worked with a long time ago, but typically you got to save for yourself. So to encourage that, most of them, for every dollar you put in, they'll put in 30 additional cents. So that's where you get a 30% rate of return. It varies between employers. Some of them won't match at all, but it becomes it's still favorable because you get you don't pay taxes on that money that you're putting into it.
Yeah.
Now the Roth is a little trickier because it's usually after tax money, but the 401k, it's before tax money and they're matching some amount. Some employers I've seen up to 100% match on the first 3 or 5%. Now that's a generous plan, but so most people out there aren't going to have that. But 30% I've seen is much more typical.
That's awesome. That's cool.
Now you're already touching on investing a bit with what you're referring to with the Roth IRA and 401ks. Best practices, though, when it comes to investing. I know I'm not as deep into Dave Ramsey's material, but when I have gone deep, I think that's probably one of those things that he kind of touches on a bit, but doesn't really give a lot of concrete. This is what you should do. And a lot of people have kind of this misunderstanding of, that's probably investing in the stock market and all these other things. Best practices when it comes to investing, what would you say? This is where I'd steer you as an audience listening.
Yeah, so if you're later in life or at a certain stage, obviously having professional help helps you with that. But just a general rule of thumb, and Dave Ramsey, he takes a very aggressive stance in terms of investing. He would say, you want it in the stock market as aggressive as you can. And I agree with that if you're young and that savings is for the future. You can manage that risk and you're going to get a much higher rate of return over the long run. So if your time horizon is out there, 20 years, you want to be aggressive as you can with that money. Now, as you start getting closer to retirement, then you need to lower your risk somewhat. And then so the investments might be a mixture of not just U.S. stocks, but international stocks, and you can diversify in tons of different ways: large cap, small cap, bonds.
How would you recommend? How would you recommend people gaining information on that? I'm going to ask for some tools and other things at the end, but even that language of cap and this and all that, people are like, oh man, this is a different language. Is there a resource or two that you would say, you should probably either talk to a financial planner, or you should read this book?
That's a good question. I brought with me I guess it's just one book by Dave Ramsey, and the other is the workbook for the class.
Okay.
But Dave Ramsey has several books out there, and it's been a long time since I read it. I don't know if he covers that, but he does cover the basics of investing pretty well.
Good.
Not in detail, I probably know it, so I can't
Not a
remember
problem.
because my wife deals in the business. I know it probably more in detail, but that would be the first place I would go.
Okay.
Beyond that,
What's the book? What's the book that you've read?
the Total Money Makeover, I think, is the one I got. No, I'm sorry. Complete Guide to Money.
Okay.
But he's got a new one that's out. I saw it on Amazon. Maybe that's what it's called. And I haven't read that
The
one
Total
yet.
Money Makeover.
But this is the one typically you get with Financial Peace University, unless
Okay.
he's changed it recently. Complete Guide to Money. But any of Dave Ramsey's, I don't know that he would change up his material all that much
Yeah.
anyway.
Yeah.
But he's, for personal finance and from a Christian perspective, nobody's even close to him that I know of.
No, I agree. Josh, you've got another question before we kind of wrap things up?
Yeah, and this one I'm looking forward to hearing because I know just that you guys have done awesome stuff and seen people's lives kind of change in a practical way. And honestly, there's just a lot of relief that comes from that as well. Whenever you start to get a hold of your finances and being able to do and accomplish certain things that you're supposed to. But we know as Christians, we're here for a purpose. And so is there any like success stories or personal stories that you know of where you've seen people able to achieve the higher purpose of serving God better because they've been able to get financially responsible?
So I'm glad you asked that. I got to probably answer that 2 times. So let me give
That's
you
fine.
let me give you first a very very personal story that was a big success and why it was important. One of my wife's very best friends for many years. She was not very good with money, and we tried to coach her through that many times. And my wife finally gave her as a gift, free Financial Peace University, and it was one we were teaching. So, but she lives in Lexington. She came here to Lawrenceburg to take the class every time, and she had been through these kinds of things over and over again, and it never really took. Well, it clicked for her,
Oh, that's great.
and it clicked at the right time. I might get emotional if my wife were here; she would get emotional, for sure. She has a great job as a lawyer. She makes a lot of money. She was so determined. She would go off on the side and take an Uber job to use the extra money to pay down the debt. And she got through all of it, including her house. And this is when I'm going to get emotional. The timing couldn't have been better because she was able to save enough money for when that big emergency came. And it came. She was about 2 years ago diagnosed with stage 4 breast cancer. And insurance don't pay for everything. And there are a lot of alternative treatments. And those are very expensive. Because she did this and the timing of when she did it, she was able to have the funds to do these alternative treatments. And she's not out of the woods yet. But we all think that those alternative treatments and insurance wouldn't have covered, and she would not have been able to do it unless she had the funds.
That's awesome.
We're hoping it saved her life.
Yeah.
And so that's one that's hard for me to get through. My wife wouldn't be able to get through that one, so, because that person means so much to her.
Yeah.
So, well, I'm not sure I can beat that story. I think I had another one. But in terms of how they changed people's lives in terms of God, I mean, Dave Ramsey has a lot of them. But this woman is very religious, and so she certainly thanks God for the timing, I guess. And another thing, I guess I would look at it from this perspective. We call this, and this is how it can help the church in another way and help you and to motivate you. If you go through Dave Ramsey's class, he talks about what does retirement look for you and that. And my wife always, and I always tell people, I said, this is the fun part. We call this the dreaming stage. When you get together with your spouse and say, man, what are we going to do when we're retired and we've done all the right things and saved up all this money? and then we dream about what our life would look like at that point. And if you're a good Christian, hopefully it's giving more. If you have the ability to, and again, Dave has a lot more examples, but it's so much easier to give to need and to the church and to, there's more to God's work than just in the church. It's a lot of it is outside of the church. Part of that dreaming is, boy, in the future, I will be able to do all these things for these people. So to motivate yourself, go through the dreaming stage, saying, man, how great could it be if I did the right things? And then I would really be able to help. And there are lots of examples of that.
No, I love that. That's
great.
great. As we're wrapping things up, clearly we've just scratched the surface when it comes to finances, money, savings, retirement, any of those things. I think you're probably going to make a plug for Dave Ramsey's Financial Peace University. Outside of that, but also even more details about that, for those who are interested in going a little bit deeper, what do you suggest? What tools should they go chase after?
If you're really just starting out, and particularly if you're in a tough, I would, I hadn't talked to you about this, is I did bring we did a basic budgeting class or video and worksheet for the Light Center. That would be but it's the absolute minimum. Beyond that, it's primarily Dave Ramsey when it comes to personal finances. I can't think of another one. I have used some online, but I can't think of them right now.
Sure.
So I'm not going to be able to give you a clear answer to that.
No, if you guys have not heard, Dave Ramsey, I believe, is a great resource to all things finance. And if you're listening to this and you're wanting, even just that basic budgeting, which your wife and you put together a number of years ago, contact us either through, Facebook or through our email's the word I'm trying to look for. However you want, and we'll try to get that to you.
Yeah.
But otherwise, hey, we hope that you guys continue to just develop a rich sense of purpose, and that your finances would be a part of that, that your community and your relationship with God would be built on sound principles of finances, and just based in what Jesus says is good scriptural living. Until the next time we meet, God bless, guys.
See you guys.
Thank you.